Hi guys, welcome to Fortress Education's first ever live stream talk, broadcasting to you live on YouTube from Fortress Sydney's office. I'm Irene, Fortress Education Counselor, and today we are speaking with Associate Professor Paul Haskell-Dowland, who's currently in Perth. He is the Associate Dean for Computing and Security in the School of Science at Edith Cowan University. Not only that, Paul is an international expert on cybersecurity, and he has delivered keynotes, presentations, workshops, and seminars across the world for audiences including Sri Lanka CERT, ITU, and IEEE. Welcome, Paul, and thank you for joining us.
Very good morning.
We also have Nathalie Collins, Academic Director, National Program. Thank you for joining us, Nathalie.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's get right into it. Okay. So, cybersecurity skills shortage is often spoken of in the news these days. So, for our viewers who don't really have a good grasp of cybersecurity, could you tell us about it and how acute is the skills shortage in Australia and internationally?
Absolutely. So I think that it's fairly well known that there is a cybersecurity issue. So we only have to turn the news on most days to hear about some new incident that has happened. And in particular, in 2017, one of the big risks that people were hearing about was that of ransomware. So we had the very big incident in the UK with the National Health Service, where very large numbers of computers were infected via some malware, some malicious software, which was propagated or transferred through networks and ultimately resulted in computers having their data locked or protected or removed from access, such that users, and in this case, obviously, we're talking about doctors, nurses, and ultimately the impact on patients, are in some respect prevented from having access to the data that they need to undertake essential activities. So, for example, treating patients. So in those kind of examples, it becomes very obvious that there is a major cyber risk and that the consequences of that can be quite dire. So in fact, can be life-threatening. Now, we often think about those kind of incidents when they appear in the press, but there are also other things that are happening all the time. So if you think about the average organization, the average country, they have a large amount of equipment, businesses, infrastructure, which are connected to the internet. And so listeners and viewers may have heard of the concept of critical infrastructure. So if you think about the equipment that transfers electricity around the country and delivers it to your home and handles the billing, if we think about the water and its distribution and the pumping systems and the valves, a lot of that is computer controlled and much of it is in distant locations. So we no longer have people going out to those sites. We use automated services, automated equipment to control and monitor those devices. And unfortunately, in order to gain connectivity to those, to make them accessible, we're often connecting them to the internet in order to achieve those objectives. So we're ending up with not only an increasing end user base connected to the internet, the home users, the businesses who use the internet for their day-to-day operations, but we're also now seeing devices connected to the internet. So we've seen incidents, for example, on critical infrastructure. A couple of years ago, there was the Mirai botnet, which affected people's home devices, things like CCTV cameras, personal video recorders. So the impact is now affecting everybody, and this is something that we're going to be facing increasingly in our day-to-day lives. Now, in terms of the requirements to protect against these threats, obviously we need a continually increasing skilled workforce. And given the size and scale of the problem, this is now a global requirement. Every organization needs these kind of skilled expert people within their organizations. Countries are needing them, representing them in terms of their services, the intelligence agencies, the police forces. So there is a growing demand for this particular skill set. And unlike many others, it's a relatively new skill set. So over the last 10 to 15 years, we've only recently seen that growth. And so there is a backlog of supply. We simply cannot provide the number of people who are needed for this particular activity. And to give you some examples, it's currently estimated in the order of a few 100,000 to maybe 1 million jobs worldwide are currently unfilled. So we can't get an exact figure on that, and it varies by report, but it is universally agreed that there are hundreds of thousands of current cyber vacancies that people simply cannot fill. And I can give you an example myself. I'm currently trying to recruit cyber academics, and I'm having great difficulty finding them. I'm looking for 2 people potentially. I have been unable to fill those vacancies. And that's just one example in one university. We then look across the broader sector, and everybody is desperately looking for these people. So at the moment, there is a skill shortage. We as universities across the entire education space are unable to provide the sheer numbers that are required. And it's estimated that by 2020, maybe as far as 2022, we're looking at many millions of shortfalls in the jobs market, specifically in the area of cybersecurity. So there's not only demand now, but there is an ongoing and growing demand for people in this particular space.
Wow, those are huge numbers. What's your take, Nathalie?
I'd like to just second that and say a little bit more detail. A lot of people are, going down that Paul probably takes for granted is a background in working with humans to get them to change their behaviors. A lot of the risk in cybersecurity is not necessarily the IT side. It's more what people are doing. Risks are from people who aren't working in IT. And a really good example of that is your standard scam, phishing scam, where people get emails asking them to click on something and someone unwittingly clicks on it, and then all of a sudden, their username and their password's available to whoever is on the other side of that. Educating people and motivating people to do the right thing is a huge part of the cyber defense initiative. So we, particularly at ECU, are looking for people with all kinds of backgrounds to become cyber professionals. And Paul, if you want to back me up on that, people with backgrounds in things like psychology, business, communications are all people who be very useful in a cyber context.
Yeah,
absolutely. So at the moment, we see obviously a surge in demand for people with the sort of raw technical skills. There's a huge gap in that particular market, but people with just those skills are obviously somewhat limited in terms of their engagement with end users, engagement with the business managers, engagement with the wider population. So there is a huge opportunity for people with the people skills, the management skills, who understand that fundamentally, although there is a technology problem, there is actually a very large component, which is the human factor. And as Nathalie gave the examples of phishing, we can put technical safeguards in place, and that is absolutely a role that we still need to do. But ultimately, it's human behavior that drives a large part of the problem. And that's not just in terms of the victims, it's also in terms of the people conducting these crimes and these activities, because we need to understand their drivers, their methodologies, their techniques, why it is that they do these things, as well as how they do them. So yes, there's huge opportunities across the board. And I don't think Nathalie specifically mentioned it, but we have in the master's courses got a very broad range of people undertaking that particular course. And we positively encourage people, particularly from a psychology background, but from a whole range of backgrounds, including the sciences, engineering, anything that introduces a new dimension to the role of a cybersecurity practitioner will find great value as they go out into the workplace.
Okay. So that's good to know that you mentioned it, because a lot of people might be thinking a lot of it might be coding or IT knowledge. So how much of it is that kind of technical knowledge, or coding or IT? Do they have to be really good at also those kinds of things to begin with?
So obviously, if you are already suitably equipped in those key skills, so things like programming is a very useful skill to have. However, for our courses, we don't assume that people have that knowledge. And as I've already mentioned, there are a whole range of other skills which are incredibly useful when moving forward into the workspace. So certainly we encourage people to build those skills, to identify the various technologies that they may need to use, to have a solid founding in things like networking and telecommunications, an understanding of software, an understanding of systems. All of these are great, but you'll pick up those skills anyway as you go through the course as a very fact of undertaking the study that we offer. But we can't necessarily teach as easily the underlying transferable skills. You need those abilities to communicate, the ability to synthesize and rationalize information, So we are looking for a very broad range of individuals, for ultimately going into a very broad range of occupations. So when people leave, they're not going to be sitting in front of a screen for 24 hours a day. They're going to be engaging in a whole range of activities at all levels of an organisation. So we ran an induction session recently for our master's students, and one of the questions I posed to them was, what do you think people do in this particular role? What percentage of time do they spend in front of a computer? And many of the people in the room thought the sort of fairly typical view of the guy sitting in a darkened corner, wearing his sunglasses, tapping away at a screen at 3 a.m. in the morning. Now, there is still a role for that kind of person. It is still out there. But realistically, most people will spend more than half of their time outside of that particular lockdown, typing away regime where you're just you and the computer. It's still a part of the role, but with the volume of issues that we're dealing with the volumes of network traffic that we see, with the levels of cyber crime that is happening, you can't sit there looking at the information. You need to automate, you need to use intelligence and other tools and techniques that we teach as part of the course to allow you to react to the threats that you encounter, to deal with them in a sensible, repeatable, almost a scientific, empirical way, to then focus on a much more important set of skills, which is dealing with the underlying human factor, because education and training is a very large part of the role of a cyber professional, because you can put all the technological solutions in place that you want, but if somebody can walk in the back door and steal the server, or if you can convince an employee to click on the email, then all of those protective mechanisms fail. It often comes down to the human factor.
Okay, understood. So, okay, in terms of education, right, there are many cybersecurity courses out there and certifications are popping up everywhere. So if someone wants to get into the industry, what should they look for in the courses that will give them credibility with industry employers? How about you, Natalie?
Well, I think actually in terms of credibility with industry employers, Paul might be best placed to have a more detailed analysis of that. But I would like to add something before I hand over to Paul. Edith Cowan University is named after a woman, and we specialize in a lot of courses which are predominantly female as a broader scope. When it comes to cyber, when it comes to IT, and science generally, ECU has very much a mission to attract women into these kinds of fields. And I think one of the things that women don't really realize, particularly those who haven't engaged in science before and may have an interest in it, but it's a passing interest in it, is what an advantage diversity has at the employment coalface. You know, this is an industry that wants women to join it. This is an industry that wants people with diversity to join it. People with different languages, with different international experience to join the community. So they're actively seeking different kinds of people to get involved in the conversation about cybersecurity. So I just wanted to put a little shout out there to all the women who might be watching this, who might be thinking, oh, this is really good for my boyfriend. No, actually, it's really good for you. So we want you.
That's great.
Now I'll hand over to Paul.
Okay. I absolutely reinforce what Nathalie just said. It is an excellent opportunity for any female student to come in through the cyber courses or undertaking any activity within the computing space, but particularly in the cyber domain, it is incredibly difficult to find the appropriately skilled, experienced and qualified people anyway, but to find female applicants is even rarer. So again, I can use the example of my recent recruitment round. I had 0 female applications, and this is in an environment that is global. So this idea of having people with a mixture of skills, a mixture of backgrounds, obviously, male and female representation, we have to recognize that the threats we're facing are global. So cultural awareness is critical, because the days of installing a firewall in your network are gone. That is not the solution to the cyber problem. It helps, it is critical, but it is not the solution. And having that more varied, more understanding, global awareness of the risks that are being faced, and recognizing that something that's happening in an entirely different country with a very specific target population can still impact on organizations here in Australia. It travels. There's no borders in cybersecurity. And that's also true of the students. So the idea is that when you graduate from a cyber course, you're not setting yourself up for a career in cyber here in Australia. You are setting yourself up to be a global worker. These are people who, as they progress through their career, will effectively be choosing where they want to work rather than going to where the jobs are. It is a global market, and there is global ongoing demand for this.
Okay. So could you tell us more about ECU's cybersecurity programs, the bachelor and the master's? And also, I looked up, and there's also a work experience component. So could you tell us more about the academic side and the work experience component part?
Sure. I also just realised I didn't answer your question about the certifications and industry, so I'll just cover that as part of that response as well. So obviously, any student going through an undergraduate or postgraduate degree will have the aim of coming out with that qualification. And obviously, in terms of what employers are looking for, one of the first items on the tick list is an appropriate qualification. So coming out with a degree in cyber is going to be the big tick to move you along to that next stage of selection. Now, it's worth noting that if people are looking at cyber courses, it is important to look at what that course is constituted from. So one of the things that we're very proud of is that we offer cybersecurity courses. They are not computer science courses or IT courses with a bit of cyber bolted on. And when you look at our course structure, we are starting in the first year typically with an introduction to the foundation topics. So it is important that any student going through the course has a thorough understanding of networking, for example. Most of our computer security threats originate or are passed through networks. So you need to understand the networking technologies. A lot of the attacks that we see are scripted or coded. And so it is vital to understand how software functions, how you can write software. And that becomes much more important as we move more towards automation, because we need to be able to automate things more effectively. So when you're looking at millions of entries hitting your screen in a day, in terms of the detected risks, obviously a human cannot go through that kind of number. So having the skills to be able to quickly filter through that information, to identify the threats, to classify them, and to attach risk factors, for example, to them in an automated way is a very useful skill. So knowing how to do software design, knowing how to build databases is incredibly useful. Obviously, once we got those core skills established, we very quickly move into the more cyber-focused activities. And fundamentally, as you progress through the degree, you're starting off with the introductory cyber activities, so introducing the concepts of computer security and information security, talking a bit about wireless security. And then as you progress through into the second year and the final year of the undergrad, or into the second year of the postgrad, we move into the much more specialized cyber units. So this is where we move on to the advanced techniques, the intrusion detection, ethical hacking. We begin to look at a whole range of topics that are actually quite advanced. Things like reverse engineering of code, trying to understand how it works and how the attacks impact on organizations and their systems. And progressively, as you work your way through that course, you build more and more of those more advanced skills. The course then, either of those, the postgrad or the undergrad, will culminate in a project or work experience activity. So this is something that, again, we're very proud of at ECU. All of our graduates will go out with a range of skills, both technical and sort of more human factors, but we also make sure that they do a significant relevant work or industry-placed activity. So in terms of WIL, the work integrated learning activity, a student will spend a semester embedded within an organization. So they will go out, they will be employed within an organization. So some of those are paid through various foundations, others are unpaid internships or placements that run for the entire semester. So this is not being the person making the tea, this is an operational member of the relevant team. So in the area of cyber, they will be undertaking investigations, for example. And we've had some students placed in, for example, the big banks, and in one particular case, they were engaged in forensic investigations within that particular institution. So these are significant roles where they're delivering a value to the organization in which they're placed. And to give you an example of how well regarded they are, a high proportion of those students go on to get full-time job offers from those organizations. So a lot of time the organizations are using it to effectively evaluate that student, having already gone through extensive selection processes, and they've often already decided they're going to employ them before they've even graduated. So that's a huge opportunity, and obviously is a great big tick against the employability angle. But for those students who choose not to go into WIL, we also offer the more traditional project-based activities. So this is where they can undertake a project, typically linked to an external organization or linked to one of our research centers or institutes in terms of a research-based activity. And they'll follow that through during their final semester, and that will typically culminate in a deliverable of some kind, usually some developed software or system, and often leading to publications within the research domain, so conference or journal submissions, which come out of that particular project. Now, we did talk a little bit about the other things that employers might be looking for, and one of those other aspects is that of professional certifications. So this is an area that is not widely promoted within universities, but certainly at ECU, we are looking at what we might consider to be the value-added opportunities for students. So you can go out with the degree, you can go out with some level of professional experience, but if we can also include certifications into the mix, it again sets apart an ECU graduate from that of another institution. So over the next year, we are slowly introducing the idea of the opportunities for professional certifications. And one of those first will be the CompTIA Security Plus qualification. And our aim is that all exiting first year students, so transitioning between first year and second year, will have the opportunity and will have been suitably prepared to take that CompTIA certification. And that's a very useful one because it is an internationally recognized qualification, but importantly, it's also vendor neutral. So it's not linked to any specific organization or vendor. It is recognized as being a somewhat universal baseline security qualification. But as you progress through the degree, we then introduce further opportunities at the higher levels.
That sounds very exciting to be. It's a good time to be an ECU student right now.
Absolutely.
Always a good time to be an ECU student.
Okay. So because you already talked about what the industry could be looking for, could you tell us about the average starting salary, say, of an ECU cybersecurity graduate?
Sure. So it actually becomes quite difficult to provide these figures. I certainly have got figures for you, but I just have to offer a little bit of caution that it is difficult to achieve this data, and cybersecurity students are in such demand that they rapidly disappear after they graduate. So it is difficult to get accurate data because we don't get a very high response rate. However, having spoken to a number of my colleagues and also to students out there in industry, the reported figures that you'll see in the surveys that are published via various websites are showing within the computing domain, which includes cybersecurity, typical starting salaries of around about 60 to 63,000. However, within the cyberspace, we're seeing salaries reported roughly orienting towards the 70,000 mark. However, these are rapidly accelerating salaries. So talking to people who've been out in industry for a couple of years, once they've got that further work experience, and as I've already mentioned, these are people who are highly mobile, globally desired employees, they're seeing six-figure salaries within 2 years. And that's typically within the sort of 120 to 130K mark, and within sort of 5 years, moving rapidly up both within the organizations and within the pay scales. So once you get past that sort of first hurdle of getting the first role, getting the experience, you become a very highly desirable individual in a current jobs market where there is massive demand and people are paying significant market top-ups to salaries to secure the best candidates.
Wow, that's a pretty good deal. Also, lastly, what kind of roles or job titles would these graduates usually be recruited for? You mentioned earlier something about being able to test the bank's security systems. So, but I guess there's more to it. What else could they possibly find in the job market?
So again, it's incredibly varied. Obviously, a large number of our students are looking for that technically oriented position. So that could be a security architect, a security designer. Many of them will also be looking at the more managerial routes, so the security manager roles. I'm sure that many of them have visions of becoming the chief information officer or the chief security officer of a large bank within a short period of time. But obviously, to reach those levels takes a number of years of experience, a number of years of building your profile within the industry. However, it's worth noting that there's a massive demand within the smaller organizations as well. So whilst we may pick, cherry pick the banks in the insurance sector and the healthcare environment, and all of these are critical employers and will be taking large numbers of these graduates, most organizations of any size have a need for somebody in the area of IT security. And whilst the sort of 5 to 10 employee size might have an IT person who has a role for cyber, there will be many smaller organizations, anything around the sort of 50 employees up to 100, who have a need for a security person that may not have, for example, the word security in the job title. So they may have an IT manager role, but with a significant responsibility for security. So certainly one of the messages we give to graduates is don't just look at the job title, because the role of a security person within an organization will be described in many different ways in different organizations. And that could be incredibly broad. But there's also opportunities in the intelligence area. So an intelligence analyst, for example, and that could be within the traditional agencies, it could be within the police. They will have needs for cyber professionals as well. You could literally take any sector and identify a security role somewhere within it. And in many cases, the word security just won't appear in the job title, but it will be a key part of the role at some point. And I don't know whether Nathalie has anything to add in that particular space.
The only thing that I think I would like to add is that we're particularly employment focused at ECU, and we're particularly driven for our students to get the kind of jobs that they're actually looking for, particularly in a field like this, which is really varied, where our students have choice. They need to gravitate toward jobs which are the best fit. So although, starting salaries are a really good measure in terms of, what you can expect when you go out there, I would encourage people to really look at where they fit into the industry and what makes them happy and where they actually want to work. And I'll also point out that we develop outside of the curriculum particular skills for students, particularly around communication skills, that we know that students need to compete globally. So we're very focused on that kind of thing, and a student who is prepared to put in the extra work can go ahead and get that better job that they're looking for, or be a little bit more selective about where they wish to work, because some people want to work in Melbourne and Sydney, and some people want to work in Perth, and it depends on where you want to work, how competitive it is too.
And I think that sort of highlights the fact that we also make sure that all of our students are aware of a whole range of opportunities outside the classroom. So one of the things, again, we were talking about recently at induction, is that whilst you can go through your degree, you can do certifications, you can do your will, making a name for yourself, getting those contacts is absolutely critical. So we encourage our students to engage in a very wide range of activities outside of the university. And this can include just simple things like attending local events organised by professional bodies, by other societies, but also engaging in outreach activities, engaging with competitions, so particularly hacking competitions, penetration testing competitions, even things like lock sports. So the concept of lock picking, which is a physical security matter, builds networking. It gets you involved with teams who then often go on to do things like the pen testing competitions. So there's huge opportunities in this space. And as I'm sure many of the people watching will be aware, there's an ongoing issue that a large proportion of the vacancies just never end up being advertised. These are just promoted directly through word of mouth. So those professional networks, knowing people, and therefore our role in introducing our students to those people also forms a critical part of that relationship as they go through university.
Yeah, I was about to jump in and say that too. A great way to get your first job is to never have to look for it at all. And we do in almost every discipline that we have industry that come to us and say, give me your best students. And in fact, industry are quite protective over those networks with our academic staff. So a big part of being successful in any course that you choose, whoever is watching, is to impress your lecturers, because they're the ones who usually hear about the jobs that aren't advertised.
Definitely.
Those are good tips. Thank you for giving us to our viewers. Also, lastly, could you tell us more about ECU being one of the 2 universities with the Cybersecurity Academic Center of Excellence? I'm sorry, did I get that right?
It is near enough. Academic Centre of Cybersecurity Excellence or Education, and there's a whole variety of different ways in which that is presented in the media. Fundamentally, the Australian federal government did an open round of applications to universities to put forward their expertise, their backgrounds, their educational offerings in the cyberspace. So what were we doing basically? And there was an evaluation process that was gone through. Many universities from across Australia submitted applications in that particular round. 2 universities were awarded the title of a Centre of Excellence in Cybersecurity Education. So that was ourselves and the University of Melbourne. And the concept behind that is a recognition, first of all, of the quality and the excellence of cybersecurity and the potential for growth. And as I've already mentioned, there is a very significant need to increase the number of people within the cyberspace. And ECU in particular was recognised as having the longest standing set of full cyber offerings. So again, highlighting the fact that these are cyber courses, not computer science courses with cyber, which is a key differentiator. Because of that longevity, sort of 10 to 15 years worth of continuous offering of undergraduate, postgraduate and PhD activity in this space, we were recognised as one of those centres of excellence. And as a consequence, we are now building on that to widen our engagement across the sector. So that's at every level, from primary school all the way through to university and beyond, the professional development, further education, etc. So it's a very great accolade for the university. We're very proud of it. And it's one that we see ourselves building on over the coming years.
Anything to add, Nathalie?
Yes, Paul is so eloquent. I'm a little bit more blunt. So I will tell you that of all the universities that offer cyber, the Australian government has decided that there are 2 that lead, us and the University of Melbourne, and we are the ones that have the greatest history and the capability of offering courses and creating cyber professionals, because that is what we do and we have been doing for many years. And in addition to that, ECU also is the top-rated university by our students and student satisfaction. There is no public university in Australia whose students are happier than ours. And that includes any other university in Sydney or Melbourne. I happen to be in Melbourne at the moment, and we offer this course in Sydney, Melbourne as well. And one of the reasons for that is because we are very student-centered. We care very much about the student. We do have the research accolades. We have the industry engagement. We have all the other things that a university has. But we never here, and we're here to create professionals for industry. So wherever anyone chooses to go, one of the things you want to do is make sure that you come first. And you want to make sure you have a great, we do achieve that, and the evidence shows that. So I do want to acknowledge that Paul and his team are really key in making that happen, because it's the academics and the lecturers that are the heart of what we do with the students. And we have very passionate cyber lecturers, and yes, they wear hoodies, and yes, they have long hair, and they've got the whole outfit. So they look the part, okay, which is great, which is one of the reasons why I like to hang out with them too, because they're a lot of fun.
Okay. Also, could you touch on shortly about the new campuses in Sydney and Melbourne?
So I think I'll let Nathalie speak to that.
So basically, my role as the Academic Director of National Programs is responsibility for these 2 new locations. We have CBD locations in Sydney, in the heart of Sydney, and in the heart of Melbourne. And we're offering a couple of business programs there, project management and the MBA, and we are also, and one of the reasons we're offering cyber is because we have, we have a responsibility to the Australian government, cyber graduates, developing more cyber graduates for, obviously the global market. It's very difficult to go out there and sell Perth because a lot of people haven't really heard of Perth. I myself, before I moved to Australia, never heard of Perth. So, when you talk about Sydney and Melbourne, it's a really attractive place to study. And so part of our strategy to grow these cyber numbers and to meet the global demand is to put the course where people would like to be. And I can personally vouch to say that all of the cafes around each of our locations, which I frequent very, very regularly are amazing. And no offense to our Perth campuses that have good cafes, but the cafes here are really good. So having Sydney and Melbourne CBDs as your campus, not such a bad thing.
Okay.
And I'd just like to add to the fact that the cyber courses in particular are also available as fully online opportunities as well. So again, quite unique in the sector. Not only are we offering a multi-location campus facility, we're also providing a fully online opportunity to our students as well. So very flexible and obviously available full-time and part-time to our students.
Okay.
That's, sorry, I just want to add that's to domestic students. For international students, it's full-time only.
Yes.
Full-time only. Okay. Paul, Nathalie, thank you for giving all this information to our viewers, and we might be seeing them. You might be seeing them soon. So thank you for the time you gave us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and that's it for our first ever Fortress live talk. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.